Hey guys, welcome to the Travis Show podcast. I'm filming this from our hotel balcony in Breckenridge, Colorado. The following is a conversation between a buddy of mine. His name is Stefan Verstappen. He does not really need any introduction. He is a fellow martial artist and has written many books on the subject. So basically, it's just a conversation about martial arts and how to train and things like that. I hope you guys.
The following is a informal conversation between my good friend Travis, a fellow martial artist, and myself. We talk about martial arts in general and probably more specifically which style is best for fighting. Thanks for listening in.
So yeah, kind of an impromptu. Just hey, let's do it right now and have a conversation about martial arts.
Yeah, just ask me anything you
Yeah,
want, anything you want to talk about. Let's just pretend we're a couple guys. What I'm going to do when I upload, I'm going to say friendly conversation with my friend Travis.
sounds good.
I've gotten a lot of my video, The True Story of Bloodsport, has gone viral. I've gotten like 130,000 views on it since I last checked, which is pretty good for my channel. Usually I get 1,000, 2,000 views for my videos, but this has gone
Right.
viral. And a lot of people really like the video, and they're glad that somebody's speaking the truth about martial arts. But maybe I can answer some of the comments that I get on
Uh-huh.
YouTube. And one of the biggest comments or most common comments I get is, "Oh, that style doesn't work in a fight." And which style is the best? And everybody sort of leans towards mixed martial arts.
Right.
You know, everybody thinks I don't know about mixed martial arts. Excuse me, I helped pioneer mixed martial arts back in the 90s. Our school, well, even before that, back in the 80s, when I was teaching kung fu at a small school in Bolton, we had no rules when it came to sparring. Now, in those days, because karate and taekwondo and all the other types of martial arts, and especially at the tournaments, they had specific rules. One rule was that once you made contact or you made a hit, the fight stops and you go back to your corner. That was the rules in those days. Oh, he touched you. Okay, back to your corner. You know, that was what, because I refereed at a lot of these tournaments too, and those were the rules. Okay, he touched you. Okay, now everybody stop the fight, go back to the corner. Of course, this is a ridiculous rule because in real life, nobody stops just because they hit you once. The tendency would be for them to pile on you and hit you 100 times. The other rule was fight stops whenever somebody hits the ground, somebody gets knocked off their feet. Fight is over, especially in
Right.
taekwondo. If the guy does a sliding kick and he slips off his own feet and he lands on his ass, which happens more times than not. It's not that somebody
Yes.
knocked the guy down. It's that his technique was so sloppy, and he slipped and he fell on his own ass. Then fight immediately stops. So I always told the guys, look, if you fall down, the fight does not stop. You understand? Oh yeah, I understand. Because what I wanted to do is listen. If you're going to spar, let's make it as close to combat reality as we safely can. So it's not mixed martial arts, it's not full contact, anything goes kind of stuff, but still, my rule was just light contact. Don't do anything that's going to hurt the other person. And other than no eye gouging and no ball grabbing and no biting, everything goes. So everybody say, okay, I understand the rules. One of my favorite techniques is a sweep, a sliding outside clip throw. It's very effective. I can probably take most people to the ground with a sliding clip throw. Do you know what that is, Travis?
Not off the top of my head. I've probably seen it, but we might have different names
Yeah, okay, so let me
uh,
describe it for you.
for
So
it.
you
So
you know a sliding kick, right?
yeah.
Right. So your left foot forward, and you're in a horse stance, and then you hop so that your right foot replaces where your left foot was, and your left foot does the kick. A variation on that is a sliding hook kick. So again, left foot forward, right foot slides. You do like a hop, and your right foot lands in the same spot your left foot was, and your left foot now, or your left leg, now comes across your body in an arc, and then you hit the person with the heel of your left foot and bending your knee to get extra momentum to the kick. So that's a sliding hook kick. Now, a sliding outside clip throw. An outside clip throw is where you bring your right leg or your left leg to the outside and behind your opponent's leg, and then you use your arm to push him and your leg to swing back underneath his legs so that he falls on his back. Does that make sense?
Okay. Yes.
Right?
Yes. Almost like a scissor takedown, only you're not going down with them.
Yeah, almost like a
Right.
scissor
You're
takedown.
using. Okay.
Yeah, we practiced the scissor takedowns too, especially once we had the big crash pads. We practiced the scissor
Right.
takedowns, but this
They're
would
kind of sacrificial, though. You're going down with them.
exactly. I don't like sacrificing it, but a sliding outside clip throw is, and the slide is fast, right? It's just a quick hop, boom, you're in there. Now, when you do that slide, almost everybody expects you to do a sliding side kick or a sliding roundhouse kick or a sliding hook kick.
Sure.
But instead, what you do is your leg goes low and you catch him right behind his knee. They go down. It's very easy, you know. It's almost like, you know, a hip throw, right, from judo.
Oh, yeah. Yes.
So it's like a hip throw, but you don't start off in a grabbing him by the lapel position or grabbing him around the waist. You don't need any of that. What you do is you slide in, and that leg just clips him from behind the knee, and he goes over
These
your
last
knee,
couple of
almost like a hip, but
days
he's not going over your hip.
have been
He's going
some of the
over your
worst
thigh.
that I've had
And
in
down he
a
goes.
while.
Okay, so
Okay.
I love the
This
sweep.
load
It's a very
is so
effective
far one of the
technique, and
most
especially
difficult loads
against,
I've had in a
somebody
while.
that's
So what do
done
you do when you're
karate
having a bad time?
or taekwondo, because
You stop
or kickboxing or whatever,
and you
because
appreciate
they never teach them
whatever
that
is good.
technique, and so they never learn
And
to defend
here's
against
one
it.
thing.
If I get a guy that's never sparred with me for taekwondo or karate,
It's pretty
I can
nice.
take him down with the sliding clip throw every time, no problem. It's
Even
almost
if all that one thing
infallible.
is just a
So,
sweet
okay,
view.
fine. I would take the guy down. He would land on his ass. Now, they forget that I mentioned that if you fall down, the fight is still on, right? So now they ignore me, right? They're so used to having the fight stop for somebody being gentlemanly and waiting for them to get back up on their feet that they make a crucial mistake. Often what they'll do is they'll roll over onto their hands and knees to stand up,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
I'll stand there and I'll wait for them to roll to get on their hands and knees. I'm really a bit of a dick when it comes to sparring. I cheat all the time, but I want you to learn how to defend against cheaters, because if you think that you're going to get into it in a street fight or in a deadly fight for your life and everybody's just going to be polite, forget about it. They're going to be cheats. You better learn how to defend against dirty tricks. So I would always pull a dirty trick on these guys. So they roll over onto their hands and their knees. And that's perfect, because as soon as they do that, I dive for them. I dive onto their back. I get them in a chokehold. I roll them onto my stomach. I'm on my back, and they're on their back. I wrap my legs around them, and I've got them in a chokehold. That's it. Game over now.
And most people, especially at the time, most people they'd be experiencing that, and they would be lost.
Oh, yeah.
Completely lost. Like, what do I even do?
Yeah.
With this? And they'll even go into the choke. Like, I mean, that's what I did, before I knew what to do with that. They'll roll into the choke and actually get choked worse because they don't know what to do.
Exactly. So those types of, when we're talking about mixed martial arts and all that, I've been sparring that way for 40 years. And then when I started working for the Samurai Club, which was run by this ex-Israeli commando character, Moni Azik, but it was a great school. I was the head instructor there, and we had 6 dojos running at the same time. It was huge. It was a huge club. We had like 9 different styles being taught there by, a dozen different instructors. So we had Krav Maga, we had Judo, we had Jiu-Jitsu, we had Aikido, we had kickboxing, we had Taekwondo, we had Karate, we had Kung Fu, which I taught. And so we had all these styles, and early on, they started doing a mixed martial arts style. This is just the very first year that the Octagon started up there.
Like 93?
Yeah.
Or something like that, like super, yeah.
Yeah, actually even earlier, 91, 92. And we had the Gracie brothers come up and do like 4 seminars at the club there. Hoist Gracie.
Awesome.
Yeah, no. So we were like, even before they all became so famous for their octagon wins. So we had the mixed
Right.
martial arts going on from the very beginning. So I know all about the mixed martial arts. All the comments about, oh well, it's mixed martial arts, kung fu doesn't work, and all this kind of stuff. Listen, I pioneered it. I was in on it even before there was such a thing as mixed martial arts. I was doing mixed martial arts
Well,
because it just made
people don't
sense.
realize that that's why it was so popular at the time, is because anyone who did martial arts before wanted to see that sort of thing. Like
Exactly.
nobody, there really wasn't like everybody was only into the one martial art. Like you probably went and learned other martial arts. It's not like you said only kung fu. It was like, oh, this is awesome.
Hmm.
People forget this, because it's been a while, and yeah.
Listen, everybody would have learned that if they come to our school, anyways. But mixed martial arts is not the ultimate fighting style. This is what people always want to
Right.
say, and I'll tell you why. A fight is a dynamic situation. A real combat is dynamic. It's based on environment and your opponent and the number of enemies you have around you. So there is not like what I tell people. There's not one perfect style to teach you how to fight. I mean,
Right.
I think you should learn some mixed martial arts. Absolutely. And I've always encouraged my students from the very beginning. I said, I will teach you Kung Fu, but I'm also going to teach you a little bit of boxing and a little bit of Jiu-Jitsu. And I'm also
Mhm.
going to encourage you to go to other schools and study other styles. The more styles you can learn, the better it is. What I tell people is it's not, you don't need to learn my style because my style is my style. My style has been developed over 40 years of practice and research, and I've chosen the best techniques from a half a dozen different martial arts styles, and even then, only those techniques that worked for my body. For example, from Taekwondo, I learned a sliding roundhouse kick. Now, when I was young, I was fast and light on my feet. I got long legs, I got a
Mhm.
34-inch inseam, so I got really long legs. I'm fast, and I could slide in and put a roundhouse kick to your temple, and I had enough control that I could just tap you and pull the leg
Right.
back quickly. That was a great technique for me. I mean, I've mastered it. I could zip in. 9 times out of 10, I could tap you in the temple with a roundhouse kick. However, a sliding hook kick, I can do it, but I never got very good at it. It just didn't suit my body. Something, my hips or whatever, or my flexibility. I don't know what it was. I could not make a sliding hook kick work. Sliding roundhouse kick, almost the same thing. I could make it work. Sliding hook kick, I couldn't make it work. So my
Right.
style does not include a sliding hook kick. Now, I would teach my students a sliding hook kick, and it's up to them if they can make it work. You practice it, and if it's something that works well for you, then great. And I've seen a sliding
Mhm.
hook kick in all the sparring matches that some guys could make this really work well, right? But it just didn't
Yeah.
suit me. It just didn't suit me. Part of when you develop your own style, when you study martial arts, you have to create your own style. Even Bruce Lee said this. He says
Mhm.
you cannot, follow what he called the classical mess. And I agree with Bruce Lee on that. Like if you take everything that's just classical and trying to do that, well, it's just a mess. It's not going to work for you. So you need to study different styles, figure out which are the techniques that work best for you. And if we're talking fighting, then let's talk fighting techniques, right? This is completely different from kata or forms. We're not going to talk about kata and forms tonight, but
Mhm.
strictly fighting and what is effective fighting. So you study all these styles. You take the best. I took spinning side kick from Taekwondo. I love it. It's great technique. Works for me. I took the
Mhm.
iron broom technique from Kung Fu. Works for me. Never failed me. Never failed me. Iron broom. My God. It got to the point where I wouldn't even use it anymore because I felt I was cheating. It was so easy to take a guy down with an iron broom technique. And
Okay.
oh yeah, yeah. From the Bagua, I've got a technique that I learned from Bagua where you end up behind the guy. You got him in a chokehold in like less than 1.5 seconds, Works almost every time. Like, listen, you got to master these techniques. You practice them hundreds and hundreds of times to make it work. But then once you've made it work, it's second nature to you, then those techniques work. I got a technique from Taekwondo, I got one from karate, I got one from Kung Fu, I got one from Jiu Jitsu. I made them work, and that's my fighting style. So every martial artist has to figure that out for themselves. What works for you? What seems
Absolutely.
right? The mixed martial arts, we had that class running. So, like I said, we had 5 dojos, sometimes 6. We divide a room in half. So we had 6 different classes running at the same time. There was 15-minute differences between the classes, so people can go from one class to another. And we had people at the school that would, they would go from the karate class into a jujitsu class, into the mixed martial arts class, all on the same night. I
Right.
remember numerous times I would walk into the mixed martial arts class, and there would be Bob. He's in the mounted position on top of Jim, and and they would be fighting away that way. Like I said, I'm a bit of a dick that way, but I would come in and I'd say, "Hey Bob, guess what? Jim's brother just came in, and then I'd kick him in the head."
Right.
Okay,
Yeah.
listen, I'm saying mixed martial arts is great. One on one, you get them down, you know what you're doing. Okay, you're going to dominate the guy, you're going to win the fight. But what if you're in a bar fight or a street fight? So you come out of the bar, you get into it with this guy. Now you've got him in the mounted position. You're on top of him, and you're raining punches on his head, waiting for his arm to come up so you can get him into an armbar lock. But his brother or his best friend comes out of the bar and sees you, or 2 or 3 of his buddies comes out and sees you. Now you're sitting there on your knees on top of this guy, and they're raining kicks in your face. So in that
Yeah.
case, mixed martial arts is not a good technique. I do
No,
not.
yeah.
I do not.
You want to get up and move. You don't want to, even if you want to use the syllabus of movement of mixed martial arts, if you will, like you're just going to do kickboxing and jujitsu and wrestling takedowns and stuff, you still have to take a different tactic. You still have to get up and move, and you're not necessarily going to just, drop bombs on this one guy,
I saw this happen when I was in the street gang here in the bad neighborhood of Toronto when I was just like a teenager. We had kind of running battles with what was called the Chain Shepherd Boys. They would drive up and they would just mouth off. And finally, there was a fight between Joe the Wop and Danny Smart. And Danny Smart was a pretty tough guy, and Joe the Wop was in pretty good shape. So they got into it, and it went to the ground. Joe the Wop got on top of Danny Smart, and he bit him in the cheek. I mean, this guy drew blood.
Mhm.
Again, the rule, I don't I have a rule against biting, but this was a street fight, and Joe the Wop sunk his teeth into Danny's cheek. So we're all standing around in a circle around this fight watching this. Now, when Joe the Wop bit Danny, that was it. The gloves were off, because in those days we still had a sense of honor, not like today. The street gang, when I grew up, if you got into a fight, it was 1-on-1, not 6-on-1.
Mhm.
And biting was certainly out of the question. But Joe the Wop just lost it, right? Some people lose it. He bit Danny Smart, and as he leaned up again, Joe Croak, who was our other big fighter, he came in and he hoofed Joe the Wop in the head like he was kicking a field goal. Well, there you go. I mean, you're on your knees on top
Yeah.
of the guy. How are you going to defend against somebody running in and kicking you as hard as they can in the head? Joe the Wop,
Soccer kicking you in the face.
soccer kicking you in the face, exactly. And so, well, Joe the Wop went down after that. I mean, he deserved it. I mean, again, in those days, we still had a little bit of a sense of honor, and biting somebody in a fight was certainly not something anybody did. So mixed martial arts too. Okay, it's great. Bring him down, mount him. Try and get him into the armbar lock there. That's great. I used to do that all the time. I loved it. It's great technique. However, if you are in a street fight, this might not be your best tactic. You know what would be your best tactic in a street fight? Boxing.
Running away or boxing. I was supposed to say running away. The track and field guys never get in fights. They just run.
Yeah. Yeah, of course. Always escape and evade is always my first recommendation to anybody.
Sure.
I tell people to say, oh, well, I want to get in. Listen, you don't understand all the ramifications. It's not just that you might get beaten up, but what if you knock the guy down? You've heard these stories about people killing somebody with one punch.
Yeah, they smack their head on the sidewalk or something.
Yeah, but that's a myth. It's not the punch that kills them. Because I used to work for St. John Ambulance. I was a first responder. I know what happens in those fights. It's not the punch that kills them. It's the fact that you knock their lights out and they hit the ground unconscious, and then their head bangs against the concrete or the asphalt, and then you've got a cerebral hemorrhage, and that's what kills the people. So let's say you get into a friendly fight. Oh, I'm just going to punch him in the head. So you punch him in the head. Now he falls to the ground and he's dead. You have to live with that
Yeah.
the rest of your life. You murdered somebody.
Yeah.
First of all, there's
Even if you get away with it, like even if it's not the legal part of it, like if you're a empathetic person that isn't a psychopath, that should bother you.
yeah, that should bother you. So that's why I tell people, oh well, he mouthed off to me. I'm going to punch him. I said, but like somebody mouths off to you, or they run their mouth at you and you punch them. But again, there is the chance that you could accidentally kill them, and it's a good chance. I mean, we've seen, Google it. How many? There's hundreds of videos of people hitting the ground, and that's it. It's over for them. It's like with the knockout game too. A lot of people die from that because their head hits the
Yeah.
ground. So you want to take the chance because somebody called you a name that you have to live with the rest of your life, knowing that you killed somebody for no good reason. Never mind the legal ramifications. If you have a moral conscience, you will never be the same. So I always recommend walk
Yeah.
away from the fight.
And not to interrupt, but I got a story that kind of coincides with this. My cousin, he in Boulder City, Nevada, he went to a bar and he got a job building the stage for this bar and the dance floor. He built the stage and a dance floor, and he was underage, but they let him drink for one night for building the stage as part of payment. And he's dancing with some guy's girl, basically. Dude comes up to him, calls him out, cold cocks him, knocks him out. He hits the dance floor just like you said. Like he hits it like a 2x4 because he was out like a light. And then he was on life supports for a number of weeks after that. And they were trying to talk my aunt into pulling the plug because there was no activity. Then there started being actual activity after a while. And, he spent the next number of months like having to relearn how to walk and talk. And he had like the mentality of a child. And it's honestly kind of a miracle that he's a fully useful adult, within a couple of years after that. And that was damn close to what you were just now talking about. Like he essentially was dead, and just, luck of the draw, he happened to be one of the ones that make it with something like that. And that happens all the time. And let's assume you're even the guy that got the punch in. What if that guy gets the punch in on you and you die because of that?
Yeah, no, that's a terrible story, and your cousin was very lucky, to be honest with you, very lucky.
Oh,
and,
yeah.
and a lot of the times, even if they don't die from it, but they're in a coma for 10 years, or
Mhm.
if they do come out of it, they can't walk, or their IQ is down to 40. There's all kinds of things. That's why, you can't take this lightly. And I always taught people, you take this very seriously, but fighting, actual fighting, is the last thing you do. It's not your first recourse because you don't understand all the ramifications. And who knows, the guy might have a wife and kids, and how are their kids going to feel knowing that daddy's a moron now and he can't walk and he's got the tremors and he's paralyzed in half of his body, and it's all because you took offense? Don't do it.
Yeah, he might have been just having a bad day or something.
Yeah. I've had people. I told the story before. They called me out for a street fight over some girl. I was at some bar in Taipei, and one of the hostess girls wanted to go home with me, and some other guy said, "Oh, listen, I arranged for her to go home with me." And I said to the hostess girl, "Who do you want to go home with?" And she said, "You." And I said, "Well, there you go. Well, then let's step outside."
Because that's going to change her mind.
Right. It's ridiculous. We're not going to fight over a hostess girl, right? So I would say, listen, let me buy you a beer. There's lots of hostess girls around. You'll find somebody soon enough. But listen, beer's on me, and I'd buy him a beer and sit him down. Listen, it's $5 to buy a guy a beer to avoid a potential lifetime of misery and tragedy. I mean, first of all, this guy was smaller and shorter than me and out of shape. I could have wiped the floor with him. There was no doubt about it. But what have I got to prove, Travis? Like, is it gonna, make me feel like more of a man? I know I could have taken him easily. I mean, when I was living in Taiwan, I was training 4 hours a day, 6 days a week. Like there's not too many people
Yeah.
that would have had a chance against me. Very, very few. And I could have wiped the floor with him. But what's the point? For my ego to show what a tough guy I am? And again, the ramifications are too serious to take that chance. Back to mixed martial arts. So, okay, it's great like that. Now, what I would do with my students, and it's based on a study that I had read years ago, and I can't find the source for it. I'm still looking for it, but I can't find the source for it. But apparently, this is the way I read it. There was a study done where they took martial artists from boxing, from wrestling, and from karate. And they divided them up into the number of years they practiced, and then they paired them off against each other. So what they did is they took all boxers, karate guys, and wrestlers that had studied for only 1 year or less, and they paired them up.
Sure.
Then they took boxers, wrestlers, and karate guys that had studied for 2 to 3 years, paired them up, and then finally they took boxers, wrestlers, and karate guys that had studied for 3 years or more, paired them up, and had them spar, and then they calibrated the results. And this is what they found, according to this study. And again, I can't find the source for it, but I remember it because that study created the way I taught martial arts from that point onward. So, the people that had studied for 1 year or less, the boxers always won. Always won. The boxers defeated the wrestlers, the boxers defeated the karate guys. The people that studied 2 to 3 years, the wrestlers started winning. The wrestlers defeated the boxers, the wrestlers defeated the karate guys. And people that studied 3 or more years, then it was the karate guys that started to win the fights. So this tells you, the effectiveness of these techniques. And I had the privilege when I was early on in my career, when I was still back a green belt, of going in the ring with a boxer, a couple of boxers. And boy, did they ring my bell. I mean,
Yeah.
man, they lit me up. I was nothing. There was nothing I could do. Boxing is a very powerful martial arts. Make no mistake about it. Okay, they don't have the kicks and the throws and all that, but 9 times out of 10, you don't need the kicks and the throws. You can Google on YouTube all these street fights, and 9 times out of 10, when you see these guys and they're faced off against 2 or 3 people, it's boxing techniques. One guy can take on 3, 4 guys, and what he does is he just runs in there and it's jab, hook, reverse punch, jab, reverse, cross, and he knocks them all down and knocks them all out. So the most effective technique for beginners is boxing techniques. This is what I would start off with when I was teaching my students, because look, let's face it, when you take martial arts, what you want to do is learn how to fight. I'd hate to have taught somebody for 5 years only for him to get his ass handed to him the first time he gets into a fight. I would be embarrassed, but I know a lot of people that they've taken 5 years in karate, still can't learn to fight. They've taken 5 years of Aikido, no way they can defend themselves.
Well, we know about Aikido, but yeah. So,
Yeah.
yeah.
The quickest, simplest, and fastest way to teach somebody to fight effectively is to teach them boxing. Now, the thing is, in boxing, the most effective technique I've found is a straight jab followed by a cross. Really important is the
Yeah.
footwork in back boxing. It's the same footwork that I was taught when I was studying 18 low hand kung fu in Taipei. It was all this shuffle, shuffle, shuffle. And you got to be fast on your feet. But if you can shuffle in fast, hit the guy with a straight line jab, 9 times out of 10, you catch him in the jaw, catch him in the nose, fight's over. That's it. It's so easy. It's fast. It's clean. Nothing complicated. And then the follow up would be a cross. So you shuffle in left foot forward. You hit him with the jab. Now, if you don't make contact with the jab, it doesn't matter because his guard is going to come up anyways, right? So even if he blocks your jab, it doesn't matter. His guard has come up. Perfect. You want that. Then you do a step with your right foot, 45 degrees, so that you outflank the guy. It's a common
Yeah.
tactic in all forms of combat. You want to flank the guy. So you come in with the jab, you aim it right in the middle of his face, his hands come up. Maybe you make contact, maybe you don't, doesn't matter. Because your next move is going to be a quick step to the right on a 45-degree angle, and you come in with a right cross. So that your right fist is now coming in to the side of his face. You hit him in the jaw, down he goes. You hit him in the button, you'll knock him out.
The knockout button. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's a
Yeah.
1-2 punch. 1-2, 1-2. That's all you need to know. Now, every style teaches a jab. Well, except for Aikido. Every you know, kung fu, karate, jujitsu, everybody has a jab.
Yeah.
And everybody has a reverse punch. Now, a right cross is basically a reverse punch, but just from a different angle instead of a.
Yeah, I mean, it might be a straight right or, like you said, a cross or something, but it's the same idea.
It's the same
yeah.
idea. So every style has that technique. So when people say, "Oh, this is the best style," or "that style doesn't work," well, if that style doesn't work, it's because you didn't make it work. There is, a lead hand punch and a reverse punch in every style. Everybody teaches it. It's up to you to make it work. You practice that, and that's probably all you will ever need in a fight. And you can take on one guy, or you can take on 3 guys. Those are the techniques you need. Mixed martial arts does not prepare you to take on 3 guys. Boxing does.
Right. So I think a lot of people, they just want this immediate gratification. I don't know if it's just my generation or what, but they don't realize that it's like, in order for you to get good at anything, you got to be bad at it at first, and you're gonna work at it for a while. So if they try something and it doesn't work immediately, but they can go to another dojo where they kind of fake it and they make you feel like it worked immediately, then it makes you feel better, and they'll go to that place instead of the one that actually has you work on the technique and learn how to make it work under pressure.
Yeah, absolutely. Those are what I call the belt factories. Oh, you got to get tested for your stripe and your second stripe and your third yellow stripe and then your green belt and then your green belt blue stripe and then your second. Oh, fuck off! It's like,
yeah.
And then of course every belt test is $50 back in my day. Who knows what they charge nowadays for a belt test?
Yeah, I remember it being around $50-$60. Now there's a place called Ripple Effect around the corner from my house, kind of.
Mm-hmm.
And when I say around the corner, we're talking 6 miles away.
Right.
It's just like that. It's ridiculous. But what we're hearing from people is, oh, I got the 2-year contract. That's the black belt one. We're almost guaranteed to get our black belt in 2 years. And I'm like, really? And I'm like, how much is it? Like $260 a month. And I'm like,
holy shit.
They're stealing your money is what they're doing.
Yeah. And they're going to feed you bullshit because, let's face it, most people like bullshit. They want the lies. They want the easy answer, and they're willing to pay through the nose for the easy answer. But truth of the matter is, you should take a year of boxing first before you do anything else. And if you have a good teacher, like I've always been a good teacher, one of the first things I taught everybody is the jab, the reverse punch, the cross, the hook. A hook punch and an uppercut I almost never use, but I still teach it. Again, it's not something I ever felt that comfortable with. I felt it didn't work for me. Other people could make it work, so good. I'll teach it to you.
But meanwhile, I almost use it as my second punch in the 1-2.
Yeah.
A lot. So someone else just might have a knack for that angle, or they might have the arms for it or something. For whatever reason, it works. My grandpa was really good with that. My grandpa was part of the the Far East boxing team in World War II.
Wow.
And that's who I grew up learning how to fight from.
Yeah.
And he was the predecessor to the Navy SEALs, so he wasn't strictly boxing. He came back with some jiu-jitsu and some judo and things like that.
Yeah.
And he had this, kind of like what you're saying. He was kind of a dick. He would let you know that he could have grabbed your balls and twisted them if he wanted to, or he'd pull your hair, or he'd nibble on your ear or something like that, like just to let you know, hey, this dirty trick would have happened just now. And then he even coached his boys as wrestling and stuff, folk style wrestling through high school and whatnot. And I'm like, this guy was this over the top kind of stories and stuff. But then when I went and started learning all these other, like trying to do traditional martial arts, I'd always end up showing it to him. And then I would fall back on his reality, like what he would understand as realistic. Yeah, he was really good at like the bolo punches into the rib cage and stuff like that. And I think it's because he was a short, kind of a small guy. He was like 5'6", 140 something pounds. And he would stick his forehead into your chest and just start going in on your rib cage, even in his early 80s.
Yeah, because that technique suited his body. I understand that perfectly. If you're a shorter guy, and especially guys that are like, say, really stocky, short legs, barrel chest.
Yeah, he was
right?
barrel chested too. Like he was shaped like a barrel.
That's
all
right.
muscle, but not like that V shape that the bodybuilders want. He wasn't like that.
Most guys aren't like that. Most guys have like a barrel chest, and like I've been blessed with very long legs, so I can do some of the fancy taekwondo kicks and make it work sometimes, but only because that suited my body. But if you're short-legged and forget about doing an outside crescent kick or a chop kick to the top of the guy's head. If you're short and got stubby legs, you can't do that. Won't work with your body. But what would work with your body, especially with the shorter guys, is what I call tiger style, and that is you drop you sink your stance, and they become almost immovable, and then you move in like a bulldozer. And like you said, get those shots into the kidneys, into the ribs. Works good for those guys, and they'll be able to take people down. I have a hard time fighting those guys because they're monsters. They come in, they're big, they're solid, they're heavy, they're low, they're immovable. The way provided I have enough room because of my long arms and legs, I do a sharpshooter technique on them, right? I stay out of their range, and then I just come in with jabs and reverse punches and kicks from a long range, and then quickly jump back out of their range, because once they grab a hold of you, they're going to take you down and destroy you. So it depends on your body type. So that's why, all these guys say, oh, this style's no good, this style's no good. You don't know what you're talking about. It's not the style, it's the practitioner. You could study any style, and if you're a skillful warrior, you will make that style effective in a fight.
Well, I think one thing is people. Okay, so MMA is really good for pressure testing in regards to, all right, like this person is trying to hurt you. So that's really good for that. There's one problem with a lot of the traditional martial arts, at least in America, like down here where we're at. It's most of them are trained so ineffectively that it makes the martial art look ineffective. Like I've seen Hapkido guys that would rip people apart because they trained their syllabus of movement. I like to use that term. It's like an alphabet, and these movements for this reason, etc. But they can do it, and they do it under pressure, and they can do it in a realistic manner. But then you go to the same martial art but a different school, and they barely touch, and like it's like, oh, you touched my shoulder, so that counts as a point. No, not really like how it works in a fight. So the problem is that is the norm in most of the martial arts facilities, is basically ineffective training. You go to a jiu-jitsu place, like even where we're at, you can do it under pressure. So then that makes it like, oh, this is what's effective. Well, if you were to take the same stuff and train it this way, you probably would find that more stuff is effective. We're finding that in MMA. I think Tony Ferguson or something like that. I'm not a big follower of the UFC, but he recently pulled off Wing Chun techniques in a fight and won the fight as a result. So it's like, oh, here it is coming full circle. You know, people forget that the Kung Fu was based off of basically MMA of its time. You know, people would fight on rooftops, or they would challenge each other to real fights where people really got hurt, and they developed Kung Fu for that, or actually developed it for war.
The second thing I would teach my students after teaching them the boxing technique is some grappling, a little bit of jujitsu. Number one is break falls. I hated learning break falls. I hated it. And I always thought it was pretty useless. But over my experience now, break falls saved my life on at least 3 occasions. Each time it saved my life, it's when I was either riding a bicycle or riding a motorcycle. I used to go mountain biking up in the mountains there in the Sierra Nevadas, up around Ojai, California. I did the mountain trails from Ojai, from Ventura, all the way to almost to L.A. And I love the mountain trails. But a few times, you're going down the trail and suddenly you skid off the trail, went headfirst into a boulder, front wheel bent in half, and I go flying over the boulder. And I'm wearing a backpack too. I always wear a backpack with water and toolkit and stuff. I go flying over the handlebars, but I'm so good at break falls, I just ended up doing a front break roll, rolled over, and landed up on my feet again. I mean, not a scratch. Most people, if they didn't learn a break fall and they hit a 4-foot tall boulder head first on their bicycle, they would, knock their teeth out on the handlebars, or they'd crack their skull on the boulder, or they'd break their back falling on it. But because of the front brake roll, that happened to me a couple of times where my bicycle hit something. I went over the handlebars, I rolled into it, and come out of the roll on my feet. That's how we used to train, do the forward brake roll. We used to have guys hold a stick 5 feet tall, and everybody'd have to jump over it and go into a forward brake roll and roll back up onto their feet. It's part of our warm-up routine, run around the dojo, jump over the pole into a brake roll, and keep running. So that saved my life. And then the last time was, or before that, I got into a motorcycle accident. I T-boned a car. I went over the car backwards. I'm flying through the air. I must have gone about 20 feet through the air backwards, head first. I prepped myself to hit the ground. Chin to your chest. Bring your arms down to absorb some of the impact, and landed on my back like a back break fall. Stood up, dusted myself off. The people that I hit almost fainted. They couldn't believe I walked away from it, but I did. And that's from the break falls. So the second thing I teach my students is some jujitsu, starting with break falls. And it's surprising, when I'd sweep guys or especially the taekwondo guys, you grab their leg and you kick their support leg out from under them, right? They would hit the ground hard. It would knock the air out of them. They couldn't get up after that. Oh, good. They didn't learn how to break fall. There's no break falls in taekwondo. So break falls.
None whatsoever. it's not even like they kind of touch on it. Like a lot of like karate or whatever, be like, hey, here's how you sprawl, and here's how you do break falls. At least a little bit, like a few times a year or something. But yeah, taekwondo doesn't even like acknowledge its existence for the most part.
Exactly, which is really ridiculous, because if you're taekwondo where all your techniques requires you to stand on one leg.
Yeah.
Like how stable are you standing on one leg in a real fight? Not very stable, right? So you're going to end up on your ass, and yet they don't teach break falls. So all the taekwondo guys, you put them on their ass and their wind is knocked out of them. They can't get up. You don't have to do any more. So break falls, and then some of the grappling, like outside clip throw, a hip throw, and a shoulder throw. And then, of course, some ground fighting techniques, what to do, to get somebody off of you if they're, in a mounted position.
Or like at least the basics.
At least
like,
the basics. You don't need to know everything. You only need to know like 3 or 4 techniques for ground fighting, and then you'll be okay. So first thing, boxing. Second thing, jiu-jitsu. Break falls, throws, and some ground fighting. After they learned all that, that's when I would teach them forms and all the fancy techniques. Now,
Yeah, it's interesting that you took that approach, and I like that. So for example, I mean, with the way jujitsu is I feel like I'm watching something evolve right now because because of the way it got under the spotlight and whatnot. So the old guys, those guys that went to your school, Hickson and Hoist and them, Hickson just started a movement where he's seeing jujitsu become more sport orientated, and he is, even though he pioneered the sport, he doesn't like to see it so sport orientated. He also pioneered it in the sense of we're going to punch each other or do whatever we want while we're doing this jujitsu.
yep,
So he is starting a movement where he's wanting there to be kind of a little bit of a rank before you start getting your normal ranks in jujitsu, basically focusing on all of the stand up, the self defense stuff. Because, everyone wants to say 80% or 90% of all fights end up on the ground. Maybe not. I don't know. It's not like there's metrics every time. It's not like there's an investigation every time there's a fight.
that's right.
Like saying how it went. So I don't know about that, but 100% of all fights start standing up.
That's right.
So these guys pulling guard and like wanting to be on their back, it's great for competition.
Yep.
But Hickson himself, who's like the best of the best ever, is saying, no, we need to remember what this is for. This is for saving people's lives.
Yes.
Okay. And so it's interesting that he's wanting there to be here. You need to learn this before you start learning all of those things. And it's that basic here. We learn a little bit of striking, learn about range, learn about distance, then learn your break falls, and then let's go on to this other stuff.
Yes. Because that's what we focused on. Get those basic techniques. Like I said, I don't want to teach somebody for 3 years and then they get their ass handed to them in the first fight they come into. I mean, what's the point then? You spent 3 years, you can't even, survive a barroom brawl. I mean, what a waste of time and money. So, and I know because most of the guys, men are men, they want to learn how to fight. Why do you think they signed up for martial arts? It's because they're afraid of getting the shit kicked out of them if they get into it. They want to be able to at least put up a good showing. So let's do that first. So boxing, and then some grappling, some jiu-jitsu, wrestling, and then finally after that we can get into the really fancy stuff. Now here we have the other argument is that kung fu doesn't work. Well, let me put it this way. It's not that kung fu doesn't work, it's that most people don't know how to make kung fu work. And there's a number of reasons for this. Number one is communism. When the communists took over China, first they banned all martial arts. The martial arts teachers that could, they fled to Hong Kong and Taiwan. That's where I studied it. And these were the old school martial artists. So anything that's been developed since the communists came to power, what they did is they emasculated the martial arts. They made sure that the effective techniques were not taught because they didn't want martial arts schools to produce fighters that could threaten the communist regime. And so they purposely dumbed down martial arts. They made it effeminate. They made it a sport. Now, as a sport, wushu and all that, it's great. It's, these guys
It's
are
athletic. It's cool.
It's cool, they're in good shape and they look good doing it and all that. But you got to understand, they were never taught how to fight. It was forbidden under communism to actually learn how to fight. But even going back before communism, a lot of kung fu was emasculated by the previous dynasty, the Manchu dynasty. China has a long history, a very long history of having their dynasties when they become corrupt, when the emperor becomes too corrupt, then people want to overthrow the emperor. And typically, where these anti government movements originated and came from was martial arts schools. So when the Manchus took over China, and the Manchus are not Chinese, people don't understand that, but they came from Manchuria. The Chinese people looked upon them as foreign invaders. And the Chinese people, or what we call the Han Chinese, hated the Manchus. They hated them. It was the Manchus that forced them to wear their hair long and pigtails to represent horses because the Manchus treated the Chinese like cattle. And it was upon pain of death that you would cut your ponytail. But the ponytails is not a part of Chinese culture, never was. It's the Manchus that instituted it as part of their tyranny. So from the very beginning, the Manchu government, there were groups trying to fight them. And all those groups that were trying to fight the Manchus, such as the Heaven and Earth Society and the White Lotus Society and the Red Fist Society, they all were from martial arts schools. So what the Manchus started to do was they cracked down on martial arts school. This is already 400 years ago. So they started cracking down on. They were the ones that burned the Shaolin Temple. It was the Manchus, and they made martial arts schools illegal upon pain of death. So if you went to a kung fu class in the 1800s and the government found out about it, they would kill you. They would kill you for going to a martial arts school. But what happened as a result of that is a lot of the martial arts started getting watered down again because they wiped out all the really good masters, and so kind of the flaky people survived, and they taught kind of a flaky version of kung fu. So when you say kung fu doesn't work, well, you got to understand it's been watered down and bastardized not only by the communists but also by the previous dynasty, the Manchus. However, kung fu can be effective. I made it a point because I was an instructor first, with a small class that I taught. Then when I was full time for this big school, we had like 3,000 students. Like I said, 6 dojos, 12 instructors. I would spar every day, 3 times. I taught 3 classes a day. I would spar everybody, and I would go to the other side. I'd walk into the taekwondo class. Anybody want to spar? I'd walk into the jiu-jitsu class. Anybody want to spar? So I had a chance to spar a lot. I loved it. So a conservative estimate, and I'm not bullshitting this, I probably sparred, 20 guys, different guys, 3 times a day. That's 60 a day times 6 days a week. So now I'm 360 guys I've sparred a week times a month. Now we're looking at, what is it, 1,500 people a month over 8 years. So I probably sparred 10,000 people. And after the first year or so, I started to experiment with myself. And I would say, I will spar this month only using crane style. I'm not going to use jiu-jitsu. I'm not going to use taekwondo. I'm not going to use any of the other styles. Only going to use crane style techniques. Well, it didn't work at first. Yeah, no, it didn't work. But I got better at it. I got better at it until finally, after about a year of only sparring crane style, only the techniques from the crane form, I got to the point where I could make a half a dozen of those techniques work. Again, you make it work for yourself, for your body type. So, for example,
well, and you're past like at that point, and you could protect yourself against anybody who was going to be doing anything to you. Like, all right, sure, maybe some pro fighter might come in and make you hurt or whatever at some point if it was just one-on-one, but that's not the point. The point is you had what you needed out of martial arts. Well, now at that point, you wanted to progress further for yourself.
Exactly.
And that's where the art part of martial art comes in. So now you wanted to see what else you can do, what else can you learn, and what lessons are there to be learned from it. I get that.
Yeah, I mean, I was okay. I was safe. I got my boxing, I got my mixed martial arts, my ground fighting. If I have to fall back on that to win the sparring match, then okay, I have to fall back on it. But in the meantime, I'm going to try and make the other stuff work. For example, something I would use in a real fight is a white crane technique called the fan hand. It's also a technique found in the white eyebrow style by Mei Chun, which is, if you've seen Kill Bill, the the guy with the white hair and the long goatee and all that.
Yeah, Pai Mei.
Pai Mei, yeah, that's actually.
I've seen some of the old kung fu movies that he was paying homage to.
Oh yeah, he's
I
in
was
all
pretty
those
drunk,
movies.
so I don't remember them. But like I remember watching them.
Actually, the pronunciation is Bai Mei, but they spell it with a P.
Bai Mei, okay.
Yeah. And it means white. Bai is white, and Mei is eyebrow. So
right, that makes sense. I probably was watching a dubbed over.
Yeah, it was a famous character. So there's a technique there called the fan hand. I would use that in a fight in a heartbeat. And the fan hand is this. It's like a back fist, but it's
Hmm.
done more horizontally than a vertical back fist, right? So it's not like the karate back fist, which they do in a horizontal manner. This is more, I mean, in a vertical manner, with your elbow pointed down and your fist pointed up. This, your elbow is out to the side, and your wrist is bent downwards towards your pinky finger, and your fingers are splayed out. So like a fan. So your hand looks like a fan, so a fan hand. And the technique is a flick, like you're flicking water, off your hands, right? So when you're washing and then you kind of whipping your hands to get the water off it, that's the technique. And you aim this fan hand into your opponent's eyes. And it's so fast because, like I said, it's like flicking water off your hands, right? It's a fast movement, and it comes out, and you got the four fingers out. You catch them in the eyes with that thing, and the fight is over. I once using the crane technique by accident. I misjudged the distance, but I sunk one of my fingers up to the second knuckle into a guy's eyeball, and I can still feel it now. It's like dipping your finger in tapioca pudding. It's like I can still
It's
feel.
exactly how it feels. I mean, I didn't do anything at range. I was being bear hugged by a guy. Yeah, like I had my arms up into it, and I didn't know a leverage escape, so I just grabbed his collar with one hand. I stuck my finger into his eye socket, and yeah, it feels exactly like that.
Yeah, like tapioca pudding, right? And when I pulled my
Yeah.
finger out, well, of course, he grabbed his eye with both his hands. He went down to his knees. Blood was pouring down his face. So I'm freaking out. But I have, first aid skills. So I went to take a look at him and I cleaned it all up. And it turns out the blood was caused by a very tiny cut, probably caused by my fingernail on the
Mhm.
outside of his eyelid. Just a tiny cut, but then facial injuries bleed more than anything else because you have more blood vessels in your face. Then that little bit of blood from the tiny cut mixed with the sweat, now it looks like blood's pouring down his face. Yeah, it's scary to see. I cleaned them all up,
And his eyes probably tearing up and stuff too,
and then the eyes
because
tearing
of
up
just
too.
like a
So you got
trauma.
the sweat, the
Yeah.
eyes tearing up, the blood. It's a horror show. But after I cleaned them up, it was fine. There was nothing wrong with his eye. You could see and all that. The eye is basically what the eye did was it compressed downwards when my finger went in, and then came back when my finger left, and everything was fine. There was nothing wrong with him. But that stopped the fight instantly. So don't tell me a kung fu technique won't work in a real fight because I'll guarantee you if I stick my finger three knuckles into your eye, you will stop fighting at that point. And it's one of the
Yeah.
fastest and most effective techniques. I mean, a guy could take, three or four punches in the head or in the chest or in the ribs, and he'll keep going, even if you give him a good punch. But you stick your finger very lightly. You don't even have to use force with it because this fan hand is just a whipping action. You rake your fingers across his eyes. One of your four fingers will touch his eyeball, even if it's just gently. It stops the fight because the reaction, the instantaneous reaction of having something in your eye, will stop the fight. So don't tell me kung fu doesn't
Yeah.
work. And
Well,
like,
and even if he was wild with anger or on drugs or something, it's not to say that you couldn't have kept fighting after that,
yeah,
and that wouldn't have caused a problem for him. He would have had visibility issues for a little bit there, and it would have, still worked in
yeah.
some way. You just might have to keep fighting for a little bit after that.
Listen, a fight is a dynamic situation with a lot of different elements involved, and you can't pre-plan that.
Yeah.
One of my friends, who is the former team leader for the Toronto SWAT team, he used to come to my school all the time. He studied Hapkido. He taught close combat at the police academy after he retired from the SWAT team. He said he would always get this question. He says, "I'm going to ask you." And I said, "Okay, what question do you get?" And this is from police cadets. They're always asking him this question. He said, "Well, if a guy comes at you and he's got a knife and he's going to come at you with an overhead knife attack, what would you do?" So Jim asked me, he says, "Well, Steph, what would you do?" I said, "I don't know." It would have
You
to
know?
happen for me to
Yeah.
know. You can't pre-plan this stuff. I mean, I know I do it too. We all practice this. Comes at you with an overhead knife attack, and then you do the block, and then you get
Yeah.
into an arm lock, or, you do cross arm block, and you grab his wrist, and then the other hand grabs his elbow, and then you bring him into an elbow lock, and then you bring him to the ground. We all practice that. Great. That's not necessarily how it will go down. It looks good in demonstrations, when you're putting on a demonstration for the parents, and the 10-year-old girl is able to take down a 6-foot guy with a knife by using these techniques, because the guy's playing along
Mhm.
and all this kind of stuff, right? and
Yeah.
and you've pre-rehearsed it, and it looks great. It's fun for the kids, it's fun for the parents. Never make the mistake that this would ever happen in real life. Okay, this is a pantomime, this is theater. And Kung Fu is very famous for theater. It's what they call Peking opera. Peking opera, they do a lot
Hmm.
of Kung
Where
Fu.
Jackie Chan got his start and all that. Yeah.
That's right, where Jackie Chan and Sammo Hung, they all went to Peking opera schools. And when I lived in Taipei, I lived right next door to a Peking opera school. And because I lived on the third floor apartment, I could see from my balcony over the 20-foot wall, because everything has a 20-foot wall around it in China. I could see into the training grounds, and I watched these guys train every day. Every day I saw them training the Peking Opera School, and most of what they were training was gymnastics and kung fu. So it's theater. It looks great and all that, but it doesn't work. So when you are in a fight, you cannot have a pre-arranged strategy in your mind for what you're going to do, because the dynamics will change. It depends on your fighter, on the techniques. Does he have a weapon? Does he have friends? What's within your environment? Do you have a lot of room to move, or are you confined to a narrow space? What about the ground? Is it icy and slippery, or on wet grass, which is slippery, or rocks and gravel, and that could be throw you off? I dare taekwondo guys to try their techniques on an icy pavement. Like, there's no way any of these things,
Yeah.
they're going to land on their ass without ever having to do anything. So these are all
Yeah.
factors that will
I
affect.
mean, I still like those flashy kicks. Like, we get to drinking or something in my backyard, and I'll toss a beer can in the air and hit it with a spinning hook kick or something to show off, and that's fun.
That's fun.
I'll also slip and fall on the grass and laugh about that. Even though I mean, I don't even like, even when I'm sparring, I don't even like try any of that stuff anymore. I just do it for fun,
Yes.
just for that reason right there. And I mean, as you know, I've been focusing on jujitsu a lot lately. I still like those flashy kicks, but like, let's remember what it is. It's like it's for athleticism, it's for balance, it's for lots of cool things like that. But I don't know about actually kicking someone with like that.
Well, I'm the same way. I like the kicks. I still practice them. I can still kick over my head. I'm 64. It looks good. It's fun. Listen, if you're up against somebody that has no training, those kicks would still work. But I always thought it would be really unfair if I'm up against some guy that's so unskilled that I could do, like, say, a crescent kick to the side of his head and knock him down. I'm just being an asshole at that point. You can tell if the guy can't defend himself against it, why do you have to destroy him with a kick like that? You could just walk away from that kind of a fight. Or even better yet, just use a restraining technique if he really got out of hand.
Yeah, and I, kind of to go back to how you said that there were techniques that you were landing on such high percentage that it turned into, even like, you didn't even really want to do them anymore because it kind of felt like cheating. Well, it's also like people forget what the purpose of sparring is. It's not really winning per se. It's, let's work these techniques. Let's learn how to use these techniques under resistance.
Yes.
So you should try to do things that you don't necessarily land all the time.
Yep.
You should try something you're not good at, if for the sake of skill development.
Well, who knows? Like, it might come in handy in a fight, depending on the circumstance. You never know. You
Mm-hmm.
can't think of these things ahead of time. You have to react instinctively, and that's where we come into the forms training. People always say, "Well, forms are no good for fighting." Well, no, you're not going to go through a kata when you're in a street fight. Of course not.
No.
What forms and kata does is it expands your kinesiatic range. In other words, your body learns to move in ways that it doesn't normally move in. And there is a type of intelligence that goes with that. We all understand IQ, intelligence quota, and which is sort of an intellectual level of smarts. There's also an EQ, which they call now emotional quotient, which is how smart are you emotionally? How well developed are you emotionally that you can handle things. But there's also a kinesiatic intelligence, which is how good are you at moving your body in different ways? Figure skaters, at gymnastics, dancing. I told people, well, if you can't find a good kung fu school, just take dancing because it teaches your body to move in different rhythms and how to maintain balance and be centered. We don't know when this might really pay off in a survival situation because, again, you can't predict what you're going to do when it happens. But if you've already trained in it and trained to move your body in all these different ways, and then you move instinctively, then it gives you an advantage. Like my forward brake rolls, I trained in it. So every time I hit a rock or something on my bicycle, I automatically went into it. I didn't plan, well, if I hit a rock, I'm automatically going to. I didn't plan it. Of course, you can't plan it. It's too fast. You're going down the, oops, you're sliding off the trail. Oh, shit, I hit the rock. Instantly went into the forward brake roll because you previously trained in it. And I had the kinesiatic intelligence to do that. So that's where the
Right.
forms come in. And that's why I would say forms for last when I taught my students. First, learn how to fight. And then once you've learned how to fight and you're confident that you can handle yourself, now let's get into the other stuff so that we can expand your repertoire of movement. That's what the forms are for. So everybody says, "Well, forms are no good for fighting." Yeah, no, I know it's no good for fighting. I know, I've heard it 1,000 times. It's not meant for fighting. It's not meant to do that. I was eventually with kung fu able to make about a half a dozen white crane techniques work for me for my body, and about a half dozen tiger techniques. Tiger is a powerful style. It's berserker style. When you go into tiger style, there's also what happens with these styles that people don't understand either is there is a mental, emotional attitude that goes with the style. So if you're doing crane style, I will use crane style against somebody that's bigger and stronger than me because I'm not going to get into it with him, right? I'm not going to get in right away, take him to the ground and start wrestling. The guy could probably take me. He's bigger, he's stronger, heavier. So with the crane style, my attitude is like the crane. You stay aloof. You stay light on your feet. You evade, you duck, you bob, you weave, and then you snipe them. You wait until you're outside his range, then you move in quick, hit him, step back out, see what happens. It's very effective in fighting against guys that are like the bodybuilders, the weightlifters, that come. And I've had these guys come in
Right.
my class too. I remember because I had an open door policy. Anybody wants to spar me, you're welcome anytime. So I'd have these guys that come in from the MMA, and they were like bodybuilders. I had this one guy. He was apparently a sniper in the Serbian army. I mean, this guy was built like a brick shithouse. He comes in, yeah, I want to spar you. I said, okay. No, I'm a little bit nervous because the guy's big and tough, but I go into the strategy for fighting these guys. And this guy would, because of his MMA training, his technique was so fucking predictable, Travis. The guy would start off,
Yeah.
he would do a jab, and then he would immediately go for a leg dive. But I know that technique.
Right.
So the jab is from too far away. I don't even have to block it or anything. He wouldn't have been able to touch me with that jab anyways because he was from 4 feet away. The jab never got closer than 2 feet to my face. So I never reacted to the jab. But most people would bring their arms up to block against the jab. Now, once your arms are up, your waist down is open, and then they would move in with the leg grab. So I knew that's what he was going to do. So
Yeah. Shooting for a double leg. Yeah.
yeah, shooting for a double leg. Now, if the guy had gotten me on the ground, he would have killed me. But he never got me on the ground, Travis. There were two techniques I would do. One, because I know that's what he's going to do. One, I would put both my hands on the back of his head, and I would hop back with my legs spread so that I'm like 45 degrees over top of him. So my legs are far away from his arms, and I'm leaning on the back of his head, and he goes face down into the dirt.
Yeah. Essentially, you sprawled your legs back,
Yep.
and you've got your hands putting pressure on the back of his head,
Yep.
and you're up and over him.
Yeah. And
Okay.
Yeah, and since he's diving for your legs anyways, yeah, he goes down on his stomach. The other technique I would use is almost the same, but instead of splaying my legs back, I would bring my knee up into his face. Like I know he's going to do that, so I grab the back of his head. Now his head is down around my waist. His arms are almost got me around the waist or around the legs. But I bring that leg up into his face. I mean, I had to stop myself, or otherwise I would have busted his nose or his jaw or something. Because it's that
Yeah.
because he's diving forward, and my knee is coming up into his face at the same time. That's the strategy I would use against that kind of a fighter. He
Yeah,
wasn't.
and you're not the only one because that's now part of really that's worrying about those two things. Those two techniques are basically staples in MMA right now.
Oh,
If you were to
really?
go do that.
Oh, really? I
Hmm?
didn't know that. I didn't know that.
Yeah, pretty much because once wrestling kind of so the really early like UFCs, the jiu-jitsu, I mean, they did a good job of setting up the right opponents to make jiu-jitsu look good. And I love jiu-jitsu, so I'm not like trying to, throw it under the bus here.
Yeah, no,
But
jujitsu is great.
it was an infomercial basically for jiu-jitsu, and they took these people out of their comfort zone. But then, even a few events in, you started to see the catch wrestlers and the pancration guys do really well.
Yep, yep,
And after a while, you even start to see the Muay Thai guys start kicking it up again. And that's what was happening. People would shoot for double legs, and it no longer were you in a situation where no one knew what to do
yeah,
with against the double leg anymore. They'd sprawl out, then they're on top of you, and those folk wrestlers or catch wrestlers,
yep,
they're going to do even better than putting their back of the hands on the back of their head. They're going to sprawl out. They're going to stick their hips on your head, and
yep.
then they're going to have an underhook, and they'd have wrist control just like that. And then even Hoist Gracie was having issues,
Yeah,
you
yeah.
know. And then the Muay Thai guys, because people don't realize Muay Thai is not just punches and kicks; it's actually a lot of grappling from the clinch.
Yep.
And you shoot for those guys' legs, and then they drive exactly what you said. They drive their knee right into your face. So it had to evolve.
Yeah.
It worked really well to get jiu-jitsu on the map, but then it had to evolve. And people who did only jiu-jitsu then had to learn wrestling, and then had to learn boxing, and then had to learn whatever. That's why guys like George St. Pierre did so well. He came in as a karateka and then learned all that other stuff, and
Yeah.
cross-trained and
Yeah,
did very well.
which goes back to the that original study against the boxers against the wrestlers against the karateka. If you have enough experience, then the karate works against the other two guys. If you don't have much
Yeah.
experience, then boxers will kill you every time.
I mean, sure, the karate guy had to learn some wrestling, and he had to become one of the best MMA wrestlers of all time. Yeah, but that being said, against other, let's say he walks into a jiu-jitsu place he does really good jiu-jitsu. This is George St. Pierre we're talking about. But a jiu-jitsu guy at his level still mows this guy over in jiu-jitsu. But in a real fight, because this is a guy who basically took the right way of learning how to fight, he wanted to be well-rounded. He would mow through the top jiu-jitsu guy or a top wrestler or a top boxer or a top karate guy just because you're if it's a real fight, you're talking about an open rule set where he can do whatever he wants.
Yep. And again, this is why
There's very few of these UFC guys I have a lot of respect for. I don't like most of the mentality, but George St. Pierre is the one that I really like.
Yeah,
I'd like to meet him.
I haven't watched that stuff in 20 years. I watched it when it first came out in the 90s, but I don't follow it anymore. But listen, this is the thing with the martial arts. Everybody has a trick, and it works for a while until everybody figures out what your trick is, and then they develop a countermeasure, this is combat. This is warfare. There's always a weakness to every technique, and there's always a counter to every technique. And the only way to be able to figure out the weaknesses and the counters is to practice different styles, or at least have an instructor that is smart enough to teach you all the different applications for the style that they do know. Like I said, every style has a jab and a cross punch and a hook punch and an uppercut. Every style has that. I'll be honest with you, the Kung Fu styles almost never emphasized it. they taught it to you. It's in the kata. It's in the form. They almost never, they didn't focus on it really.
Yeah, I ain't gonna lie. I found it strange that, like, because I did United Studios of Self Defense, which is, if you ask me, it's one of those belt factories.
Yeah.
But probably one of the better of the belt factories. They did do full contact sparring,
Yeah.
so you would get an understanding of what you were trying to do, at least in the context of that. So, but I always found it weird. We would do our drills from like horse stands and whatnot, and then we would do the katas or the pinyons, and there'd be totally different things in there than what we were drilling at the beginning class. And then if we sparred, all of a sudden we're all boxers.
Yeah.
Like we have our hands up in a completely different way than any of our other. It was very incongruent.
Yeah.
I was like, what are we doing here? I think a lot of it is I love your video about decoding the forms.
Yeah.
And because I think a lot of it is like, and a lot of forms have this move where one hand, let's say your left hand is going to your elbow, your hip, your elbow position, and then your right hand goes into an inside block.
At this point, our Skype connection gets cut off. Thanks for listening in. Bye-bye.